Imagine waking up tomorrow, um, packing your newborn into their car seat, and driving to your pediatrician's office for their scheduled checkup.
Right, just a totally normal morning.
Exactly. But then you get there and you find out the entire schedule of childhood vaccines in the United States has just been frozen.
Just completely suspended.
Yeah, locked in a legal deep freeze by, like, a single federal judge in Massachusetts.
Yeah.
I mean, that is exactly the reality we woke up to this week.
It is a profound systemic shock. Honestly, we are watching this massive collision of executive political ambition and deeply entrenched administrative law.
And it's happening in real time.
Real time, yeah.
Yeah.
With the immediate health care of millions of kids just hanging in the balance.
Usually, when we talk about a medical diagnosis, there's this comforting expectation of precision. It is kind of like engineering.
Sure, like a broken bone.
Right. You break your arm, the x-ray shows that jagged white line, the doctor points to it, and that's that. It's visible, it's categorized, and it's undeniably clear.
We all want the rules of science to be that clear-cut.
We really do. But the moment you step out of the clinical exam room and into this sprawling world of public health policy,
In federal courtrooms.
yeah, the x-ray machine just shatters. We're no longer just looking at biology here.
No, we're looking at a diagnostic landscape that is incredibly murky. It's governed by procedural rules, legal precedents, and a lot of political maneuvering.
It is the absolute definition of diagnostic muddy waters. So welcome to this deep dive, custom tailored just for you.
Glad to be here.
Today, our mission is to navigate these incredibly turbulent waters. We are unpacking a massive legal earthquake coming out of Massachusetts.
It's a huge one.
We are looking at comprehensive notes, legal filings, and reporting surrounding a federal judge, Judge Brian Murphy, who has officially struck down the vaccine policies of Health Secretary Robert F. Kennedy, Jr.
Which effectively stops the United States government's current health agenda right in its track.
Dead in its tracks. Now, very quick heads up for you listening. We are wading into heavily politicized waters today.
We definitely are.
The source material we are pulling from involves the Trump administration, Robert F. Kennedy, Jr., and traditional medical establishments like the American Academy of Pediatrics.
Right, the AAP.
So I want to state unequivocally that we are not taking any sides here. We are not endorsing the viewpoints of the original source content, nor are we condemning them.
That's a vital framing.
Yeah, our mission is strictly to pull apart the legal mechanics of this ruling so you can understand the machinery at work. We are here to look at the facts, the history, and the arguments.
Leaving the political commentary at the door.
Exactly. Okay, let's unpack this. The core event here is staggering in its scope.
It really is.
Massachusetts federal judge Brian Murphy didn't just tweak a minor administrative rule or ask for, like, a slight revision to a public health pamphlet.
No, he took a judicial sledgehammer to the current administration's vaccine policies.
A total sledgehammer. He effectively reversed every major change that has been made to the national vaccine framework over the past year.
What's fascinating here is the specific mechanism the judge used. I mean, it is a really common misconception that a federal judge can strike down a policy simply because they personally disagree with the medical science behind it.
Right, like they can't just play doctor from the bench.
Exactly. A judge doesn't have the authority to sit there and declare, I don't like this theory on immunology.
So what did he base it on?
Judge Murphy ruled entirely on the process. The ruling stated that the government disregarded science and fundamentally bypassed the strict legal requirements that dictate exactly how these monumental health decisions must be made.
So we are not looking at a judicial debate over whether a specific vaccine is inherently good or bad.
Not at all.
We are looking at a debate over the legal homework the government is required to do before they are allowed to make a rule about that vaccine.
That is the crux of administrative law. When the government seeks to make a sweeping change that affects the public, especially public health, they are legally obligated to show their work.
Like a math test.
Right. They must follow a highly specific, evidence-based procedural path. So Judge Murphy's ruling essentially acts as this massive stop sign stating the administration ignored the established map and drove right off the procedural cliff.
And the immediate real-world impact of this stop sign is wild.
Oh, it's massive.
Because of this decision, the Advisory Committee for Immunization Practices, which we will call the ACIP going forward, is legally prevented from even holding a meeting this week.
That is huge.
To give you some context, the ACIP is the group that guides American vaccine policy. They are the brain trust telling the country, the hospitals, the insurance companies, which shots to take and when.
And right now, their doors are literally legally barred shut by a federal court order.
Which brings us to how we got to this freezing point in the first place.
Yeah.
The lawsuit that triggered this legal earthquake brought by major medical groups, including the AAP, it didn't just materialize out of thin air.
No, it was a direct, very aggressive response to a complete ground-up overhaul of that very committee.
Right. When Robert F. Kennedy Jr. took over as health secretary, he didn't just appoint a few new voices to fill empty seats.
He cleaned house.
The reporting shows he fired all 17 previous members of the ACIP. The entire board. Completely cleared out.
Which is pretty unheard of.
And he replaced them with 15 new individuals.
A complete changing of the guard of that magnitude is virtually unprecedented for a specialized scientific advisory committee.
Because you lose all that institutional memory, right?
Exactly. Historically, these committees have staggered terms specifically to ensure the continuity of institutional knowledge. You really don't want the entire board turning over at once.
Why is that so dangerous?
Because reviewing longitudinal vaccine data requires this deep, ongoing familiarity with decades of prior research.
But stacking the committee was really only part of the controversy. The medical groups sounded the alarm because of the actual makeup of those 15 new appointees.
Yeah, the credentials were a huge sticking point.
The AAP brought forward this staggering statistic in their lawsuit. Out of those 15 new members appointed by RFK Jr., only 6 of them actually had what the lawsuit termed meaningful experience in vaccines.
Which means the majority of the board on a federal committee specifically designed by statute to advise the nation on complex immunization practices lacked foundational expertise.
In the very subject they were appointed to oversee.
Right.
There is this striking quote from the source material from an expert, Dr. Tina Hartard. She compared this situation to letting amateur pilots dictate how airplanes fly.
It's a vivid comparison.
It is, but I want to refine this analogy for a second because it really gets to the heart of the legal issue at play in Judge Murphy's courtroom.
Let's hear it.
Let's imagine a hospital fires all of its top cardiovascular surgeons.
Okay.
And they replace them with hospital administrators who have literally never held a scalpel, let alone performed a bypass.
Sounds like a terrible hospital.
Right. If those new administrators then sit down and rewrite the entire rule book for how open-heart surgery must be performed, is it merely their lack of expertise that makes this illegal under administrative law? Or is it the process of how they're trying to change the rules?
It's the latter. It is entirely the process. Your hospital analogy highlights the exact legal tripwire here.
How so?
Well, in administrative law, the executive branch actually has a tremendous amount of leeway to appoint whoever they want to these positions. The president won the election, and the administration has the power of appointment.
So they can hire the administrators.
Yes.
Right.
However, once those appointees are in the room, they are bound by a rigid legal standard established by the Administrative Procedure Act of 1946.
The APA.
Right. Specifically, they cannot make decisions that are arbitrary and capricious.
Arbitrary and capricious. Honestly, that sounds like the legal phrasing you would use to describe a chaotic toddler throwing a tantrum in a grocery store.
It does sound like that.
So what does that actually mean when applied to federal health policy?
It is a critical legal threshold. The APA was designed to prevent agencies from ruling by sheer dictatorial fiat. Legally speaking, a decision is deemed arbitrary and capricious if the agency entirely failed to consider an important aspect of the problem.
Or if they ignore the obvious facts, right?
Exactly. Or if they offered an explanation for their decision that runs completely counter to the evidence before the agency.
Okay, going back to my hospital analogy.
Right. Firing the surgeons and hiring administrators to write surgical rules isn't strictly illegal on its face.
It's just a bad idea.
Legally, yes. What makes it illegal is if those administrators try to implement a new surgical protocol without presenting a single peer-reviewed clinical trial or without providing data showing their new method works better than the old one.
They can't just say, hey, we feel like doing it this way now.
They cannot. They have to show the math. They have to prove that the new rule is grounded in reality, not just preference.
And that is exactly where the government's argument began to disintegrate in Judge Murphy's courtroom.
It really fell apart.
The source material provides a glaring example of this. One of the newly appointed committee chairs, one of the individuals the lawsuit flagged as having questionable experience, suggested that the polio and measles vaccines should be made optional on the national schedule.
Which is a huge red flag for the medical community.
Let's pause on that. Polio and measles. These are 2 diseases that historically devastated global populations.
Measles is notoriously one of the most contagious viruses known to humanity.
So why did this new chair suggest making them optional?
The chair stated, on-the-record reasoning was that these diseases aren't dangerous anymore.
I'm genuinely trying to wrap my head around that statement. Aren't dangerous anymore. Do they elaborate on why they believe a virus with a massive historical death toll just suddenly lost its edge?
They pointed to the current incredibly low case numbers in the United States.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and this is exactly the legal logic trap that Judge Murphy caught them in. The court found this reasoning to be fundamentally dangerously flawed.
Because it's circular logic.
It is a textbook example of circular logic. Polio and measles are not widespread or immediately dangerous to the general public right now because of the decades-long mandatory use of those exact vaccines.
Okay, I see. They're looking at the undeniable success of the vaccine, pointing at the low disease rates, and using that success as the primary argument to stop using the vaccine.
From a critical thinking standpoint, it is a catastrophic failure of causal reasoning. The judge essentially pointed out that you cannot use the absence of rain on your living room floor as a logical justification to tear down the roof.
Because the roof is what's keeping the floor dry.
Exactly.
That is a brilliant way to visualize it. You don't throw away your umbrella in the middle of a torrential downpour just because your shoulders are currently dry.
You'd get soaked immediately.
But I want to play devil's advocate here because I know what some listeners might be thinking.
Okay, let's hear it.
If a disease really is practically eradicated within the borders of the United States, isn't it at least a fair scientific question to ask if we still need to mandate the shot? Why does asking that question fail the arbitrary and capricious test?
It is always fair to ask the question, but the legal standard requires the answer to be based on comprehensive scientific data, not just a superficial glance at current case counts.
So they needed deeper data.
Right. Take measles, for instance. It has an R0 value of somewhere between 12 and 18.
Meaning?
That means one infected person will, on average, infect up to 18 unvaccinated people. It can hang suspended in the air for up to 2 hours after an infected person leaves a room.
That's terrifying.
It is. To prevent an outbreak, you need a herd immunity threshold of about 95% of the population vaccinated.
So the margin for error is razor thin.
Incredibly thin. If you drop the mandate and vaccination rates slip to even 90%, the scientific modeling shows that outbreaks will immediately return.
Because the virus hasn't changed.
Exactly. The virus hasn't changed. Our societal armor against it has just held. Therefore, a federal official stating the disease is not dangerous anymore completely ignores the established epidemiological mechanism of why it isn't currently dangerous.
And ignoring that causality is the very definition of arbitrary and capricious decision-making under the law.
That's it, exactly.
That makes total sense.
Yeah.
They didn't do the homework to prove the virus itself had weakened. They just looked at the result of the previous policy and decided the policy was no longer needed.
And when you try to write federal policy based on that logical fallacy, a federal judge is going to throw up a massive red flag.
And that red flag forms the bedrock of this entire ruling.
It establishes a hard boundary. While the executive branch has the power to appoint leaders and set a general political agenda, it does not have the legal power to ignore basic causality, historical context, and established scientific reality.
Especially when making binding rules that govern public health.
Absolutely.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because stacking the committee with non-experts was only half the strategy.
Oh, right. The memo.
Yeah. When the administration realized that even their newly appointed board might face legal hurdles or public pushback in trying to change the rules, they decided to circumvent the board entirely. Let's talk about the January 2026 memo.
The January memo. This document is where the procedural violations transition from questionable logic to glaringly apparent administrative bypass.
According to the reporting we are reviewing, this memo was issued by Jim O'Neill, who is the acting director of the CDC.
Right.
And this single memo attempted to execute a massive, sweeping policy shift. It officially cut the childhood immunization schedule, the standard list of shots recommended for kids, from 17 diseases down to 11.
A reduction of nearly 40% of the standard pediatric immunization schedule.
40%. And it was done via a stroke of a pen on a memo.
Bypassing the entire scientific review process.
Let's make this incredibly concrete for you listening. One of the specific changes enacted in this memo was the decision to stop recommending the hepatitis B shot for newborns.
Yes, that was a major point of contention.
Now, I want to dig into this because hepatitis B is often associated with intravenous drug use or unprotected sex. So why do we currently give the Hep B shot to newborns in the first place? It seems really counterintuitive.
It is a vital question, and understanding the answer is crucial to understanding why dropping it via memo is so legally problematic.
Walk me through it.
Before the early 1990s, the U.S. actually tried a risk-based approach to hepatitis B. They only vaccinated adults who were deemed high risk.
And I'm guessing that didn't work.
It completely failed. The virus continued to spread rapidly. Why? Because hepatitis B is incredibly resilient, and people can be asymptomatic carriers for decades.
Meaning a mother could have it, feel perfectly fine, have no idea she is infected, and then pass it to her baby during childbirth.
Exactly. That is called vertical transmission. And if an infant contracts hepatitis B, their immune system is not developed enough to clear it.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, there is a 90% chance that the infant will develop a chronic lifelong infection, which frequently leads to liver cancer or cirrhosis later in life.
That's devastating.
So in 1991, the ACIP reviewed mountains of clinical data and realized the only way to stop the spread and protect infants was a universal strategy.
Vaccinate everyone.
Vaccinate the baby on day one, creating a protective shield before they ever leave the hospital. That policy caused infant infections to absolutely plummet.
So modifying or dropping that day one hepatitis B recommendation normally requires a massive, rigorous, evidence-based review.
The committee would have to look at current vertical transmission rates, maternal screening data, and long-term liver cancer projections.
They can't just guess.
They would spend months, if not years, reviewing the data before making a change. But Acting Director O'Neill just bypassed the ACIP entirely. He signed a memo and dropped the recommendation.
And this is where the tension between executive authority and administrative process reaches its absolute boiling point.
It's explosive.
The AAP and other medical groups sued, arguing that you cannot just delete a foundational pillar of pediatric health via a memo without doing the required scientific review.
Which is exactly what the APA forbids.
And when the administration was taken to court over this memo, their legal defense in Judge Murphy's courtroom was, honestly, it is shocking to read.
It really is.
The administration's lawyers stood up and argued that the Secretary of Health has unreviewable authority over these decisions.
Unreviewable is perhaps one of the most dangerous words you can utter in a constitutional republic.
What does that mean in legal terms?
It essentially means that the courts have no jurisdiction to even look at the decision, let alone strike it down.
Like they're above the law.
It is a bold claim of absolute, unchecked executive power in the realm of public health.
I know what you, the listener, are likely thinking right now. How can any lawyer stand up in a federal court and claim unreviewable authority?
It sounds absurd.
It does. Because don't elections have consequences? The voters put this administration in power specifically because they campaigned on disrupting the health agencies.
That's the core of their argument.
Isn't Judge Murphy actually thwarting the Democratic will by demanding adherence to the old rules? Why doesn't the executive branch have the authority to just say, we promised to change this, so we are changing it?
That is the exact friction point between politics and the law. Yes, elections have consequences, and a new administration has the absolute right to set a new direction and appoint people who share their vision.
Right.
But, and this is a massive, but the United States operates under the separation of powers. Congress passes laws, and the executive branch implements them.
And Congress passed the APA.
Exactly. Congress passed the Administrative Procedure Act to explicitly require that when agencies implement or change rules, they must base those changes on a rational review of evidence.
So an election victory does not grant an administration a magic wand to wave away the legal requirement to show their work.
They cannot rule by decree.
And to prove just how absolute they believed this executive power was, the administration's lawyer used an extreme hypothetical in court to illustrate their point.
This part is just wild.
He argued that under their interpretation of the law, the health secretary could legally use his authority to recommend that people get infected with measles instead of getting vaccinated.
That is a staggering legal posture to take. To openly argue in a federal courtroom that the government possesses the unreviewable, untouchable authority to actively recommend citizens contract a potentially lethal infectious disease.
It's a huge flex.
It is a profound flex of theoretical executive power. They were essentially daring the judge to find a legal limit to their authority.
It is basically saying we have the power to do whatever we want, even if it is objectively medically harmful, And you, the judge, cannot say a word about it because you lack jurisdiction.
I cannot imagine any federal judge reacting well to being told they have absolutely no oversight.
Especially using a hypothetical that involves intentionally infecting the public.
Right. If we connect this to the bigger picture, you can see exactly why Judge Murphy reacted the way he did. The source material notes he essentially scoffed at the idea.
He wasn't having any of it.
It was a polite but incredibly firm, absolutely not.
Good for him.
The judge ruled that government officials cannot rely on personal skepticism, campaign promises, or theories of absolute authority when it comes to the health of the populace.
They are tethered to the law.
And the law explicitly requires public health decisions of this magnitude to be based on science, evidence, and established procedural review.
So the judge is saying, no, your power is not absolute. Your power is conditionally tethered to the scientific method and the administrative laws that require you to use it.
You cannot just skip the homework and demand the grade. You have to prove with clinical evidence why the hepatitis B vaccine is no longer needed for newborns.
You can't just memo it away.
Exactly. Executive power has hard structural legal limits when it intersects with established scientific review mandates. You cannot simply memo away decades of procedural law just because you happen to hold the office at the moment.
So what does this all mean?
Good question.
We have talked extensively about the history of the ACIP, the intricacies of the Administrative Procedure Act, the mechanisms of hepatitis B, and the hypothetical measles infections in federal court.
We've covered a lot of ground.
But let's bring this directly back to you, the listener. What does this ruling mean for your daily life? What does this mean if you have a child and you are scheduling your next pediatrician visit tomorrow morning?
That is the most vital, practical takeaway for the public right now. Because of Judge Murphy's ruling, the administration's new reduced schedule of 11 vaccines is completely frozen.
Dead in the water.
It cannot be legally implemented or distributed as official guidance. Therefore, by default, the old schedule is back.
The comprehensive schedule that covers 17 diseases.
Right. The one built on decades of accumulated clinical research, epidemiological data, and committee consensus, it is immediately back in full effect.
So if you go to the doctor tomorrow, your pediatrician is operating under the traditional pre-RFK junior standards.
And the reporting notes that major medical groups like the American Medical Association and the AAP didn't even wait for the dust to settle.
No, they moved fast.
They have already publicly issued their own independent schedules that perfectly mirror those exact traditional federal standards. They are proactively stepping in to ensure there is absolutely no confusion at the clinical ground level.
They're acting as a stabilizing force for the medical community.
One expert quoted in the source text referred to this traditional, rigorously vetted vaccine framework as the crown jewel of public health.
That's a powerful phrase.
For the traditional medical establishment, Judge Murphy's ruling is a massive sigh of relief victory. It protects the integrity of that crown jewel, relying on the courts to enforce the scientific process.
However, we have to recognize that, at least for the moment, is the operative phrase here.
Oh, absolutely, because this conflict is far from over.
This was merely round one in a district court. The Trump administration has made it abundantly clear they are not walking away from this fight.
They are already looking forward to an appeal in a higher court.
And their framing of this ruling as they prepare for that appeal is very telling.
It is. They're not framing this as a technical debate over the scientific data regarding hepatitis B or polio.
No, they're framing this as a fundamental issue of judicial overreach.
They view Judge Murphy not as a referee enforcing procedural law, but as a rogue actor utilizing the bench to stop the elected executive branch from governing.
From fulfilling its mandate to the voters, it really is a massive collision of two entirely different worldviews.
Completely different.
On one side, you have the America First health agenda, which seems heavily focused on disrupting the status quo, aggressively challenging established medical norms, and asserting direct, top-down executive control over health policy.
And on the other side, you have the traditional medical establishment,
which relies entirely on historical data, rigorous bottom-up committee processes, and the judicial system to act as a firewall against sudden political shifts.
It is a battle for the very definition of how public policy should be formulated in the 21st century.
Does truth and policy come from the top down, driven by the mandate of an election and the stroke of an executive pen?
Or must it inherently come from the bottom up, driven by scientific consensus, peer review, and the guardrails of procedural law?
And as this case inevitably climbs its way up to the appellate courts and potentially the Supreme Court, those two fundamentally opposed philosophies are going to clash again.
Probably with even higher stakes. Which raises an important question, and it is something I want to leave you, the listener, to mull over long after this deep dive ends.
Okay.
We have established today that Judge Murphy ruled the government must base its health policies on science. The administrative law requires it.
Right, it's the law.
But what happens to the future of public health when the very definition of what constitutes valid science is no longer a shared societal consensus? What happens when science is no longer something determined in a laboratory by peers analyzing data, but rather becomes a subjective battleground fought over by lawyers in an appellate courtroom?
That's a scary thought.
If one political faction believes a vaccine is a medical miracle, and the opposing faction believes it is an inherent hazard, and both sides employ lawyers to argue their curated version of the facts to an appellate judge who has absolutely no scientific training, how does a society confidently protect its health?
That is a deeply unsettling thought. When the X-ray machine is broken and the lawyers are arguing over what the blurry lines on the film actually mean, it is the patient, the public, who ultimately suffers the confusion and the consequences. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We will be keeping a very close eye on this diagnostic landscape as the appeals process unfolds. Until next time, stay curious.